in the quiet suburbs of Millbrook, where picket fences stood like sentinels and perfectly manicured lawns stretched as far as the eye could see, lived the Johnsons. They were your typical American family, hard-working parents, 2 kids, and a golden retriever named Buddy. Little did they know that their lives were about to take an unexpected turn, all because of something they'd put in their freezer on Halloween night. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Sarah Johnson first heard the whispers. She was at the local supermarket, reaching for a box of her kids' favorite cereal, when Mrs. Henderson, the town gossip, sidled up to her with a conspiratorial gleam in her eye. "Sarah, dear," Mrs. Henderson began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Have you heard about the thing?" Sarah raised an eyebrow, her hand still on the cereal box. "What thing, Mrs. Henderson?" The older woman leaned in closer, her perfume a cloud of lavender and secrets. "They say if you put it in your freezer on Halloween night, it'll keep all the evil away. All the bad luck, the misfortunes, the things that go bump in the night." Sarah couldn't help but chuckle. "Mrs. Henderson, you can't be serious. What is this, some kind of urban legend?" But Mrs. Henderson's face remained deadly serious. "Mock it, if you will, my dear. But don't come crying to me when the darkness comes knocking at your door." With that ominous warning, Mrs. Henderson shuffled away, leaving Sarah standing in the cereal aisle, her mind swirling with questions. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the conversation as nothing more than small-town superstition. After all, she was a rational woman, a high school science teacher who dealt in facts and evidence, not old wives' tales and ghost stories. Yet, as she finished her shopping and headed home, Sarah couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there might be more to Mrs. Henderson's words than she cared to admit. The world was full of mysteries, wasn't it? And who was she to dismiss something outright without at least considering it? At home, Sarah busied herself with the usual after-school routine, helping the kids with homework, preparing dinner, and trying to keep Buddy from chewing up another pair of shoes. But all the while, Mrs. Henderson's words echoed in the back of her mind. That evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, Sarah decided to broach the subject. "So," she began, trying to sound casual, "I heard something interesting at the supermarket today." Her husband, Tom, looked up from his meatloaf. "Oh yeah, what's that?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, suddenly feeling a bit foolish, but she pressed on. "Well, Mrs. Henderson was talking about some kind of protection ritual, I guess you'd call it. Something about putting an object in the freezer on Halloween night to ward off evil." Tom snorted, nearly choking on his food. "Sarah, honey, you can't be serious. That sounds like something out of a bad horror movie." Their daughter, Emily, a precocious 12-year-old with a penchant for all things supernatural, perked up immediately. "Really, Mum? That sounds so cool. What kind of object is it?" "I don't know, sweetie," Sarah admitted. "Mrs. Henderson didn't say." "Oh, come on," Tom interjected. "You're not actually considering this, are you? It's nonsense, pure and simple." Sarah shrugged, feeling a mix of embarrassment and defensiveness. "I'm not saying I believe it, Tom. I'm just curious, that's all." Their son, Max, a quiet 9-year-old who usually had his nose buried in a book, spoke up. "Maybe we should try it," he said softly. "Just in case." Tom opened his mouth to protest, but Sarah cut him off. "You know what? Maybe we should. What's the harm, right? If nothing else, it'll be a fun family activity for Halloween." And so, despite Tom's skepticism, the Johnson family found themselves caught up in the mystery of the freezer protection ritual. Over the next few days, it became the talk of the town. Everyone seemed to have a different idea about what the object should be, but no one could agree on the specifics. Some said it should be a silver coin. Others insisted it had to be a piece of black obsidian. One old-timer at the local diner swore up and down that the only thing that would work was a chicken's foot, while the New Age shop owner in town argued passionately for a bundle of sage and crystals. As Halloween approached, the excitement in Millbrook reached a fever pitch. Even those who scoffed at the idea couldn't help but get caught up in the fervor. The local news ran a segment on the phenomenon, interviewing residents about their plans and speculations. Sarah found herself spending more and more time researching protection rituals and folklore. She pored over books from the library, scoured the internet for information, and even reached out to a folklore professor at the nearby university. The more she learned, the more fascinated she became. Protection rituals, it turned out, were as old as humanity itself. Every culture had its own traditions and beliefs about warding off evil and inviting good fortune. The idea of using the freezer was certainly a modern twist, but the underlying concept was ancient. As she delved deeper into her research, Sarah began to see connections she'd never noticed before. The way people hung horseshoes over their doors, the evil eye amulets that adorned so many homes, even the tradition of knocking on wood. They were all part of this vast tapestry of human belief and superstition. Tom watched his wife's growing obsession with a mixture of amusement and concern. "You're really getting into this, aren't you?" he asked one evening, finding her surrounded by books and printouts. Sarah looked up, a little sheepish. "I know it sounds crazy, but there's just something about it, Tom. It's not just about warding off evil. It's about hope, about feeling like we have some control in a world that often seems so chaotic." Tom sat down beside her, his expression softening. "I get it, I do. But you know none of this is real, right? It's just stories and superstition." Sarah sighed. "Maybe. But what if it's not? What if there's more to the world than we can explain with science? I'm not saying I believe in ghosts or demons, but I don't know. Maybe there's some truth to the idea that our beliefs and intentions can shape our reality." Tom wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Well, if it means that much to you, I'm in. Whatever you want to put in that freezer, I'll support you." As Halloween drew nearer, the Johnson family found themselves caught up in heated debates about what their freezer offering should be. Emily was all for creating an elaborate protection bundle with herbs and crystals, while Max thought they should stick to something simple, like a silver coin. Sarah, drawing on her research, suggested a more personalized approach. "What if we each contributed something meaningful to us?" she proposed. "Something that represents protection or good fortune in our own lives." The idea caught on, and soon each family member was pondering their contribution. Even Tom, despite his initial skepticism, found himself drawn into the process. On the morning of Halloween, the Johnsons gathered around the kitchen table, each with their chosen item. Sarah went first, placing a small vial of water from the beach where she and Tom had honeymooned. "For me, this represents the strength of our family bond," she explained. "No matter what storms come, we'll weather them together." Tom went next, somewhat bashfully producing a lucky poker chip he'd carried in his wallet for years. "I know it's silly," he admitted, "but every time I've had this with me, things have just seemed to go my way." Emily contributed a friendship bracelet she'd made with her best friend, while Max offered up a smooth river stone he'd found on a camping trip. Even Buddy got in on the action, with Sarah including one of his favorite chew toys. As they carefully arranged their items in a small cloth bag, there was a palpable sense of something in the air. Not quite magic, but a feeling of connection, of shared purpose. "Now remember," Sarah said as she tied the bag closed, "the most important part of any ritual is the intention behind it. So let's all take a moment to focus on what we want to protect: our family, our home, our happiness." They stood in a circle, hands joined, each lost in their own thoughts. Even Tom, the eternal skeptic, found himself moved by the moment. As night fell and trick-or-treaters began to roam the streets, Sarah placed their protection bundle in the freezer with a sense of ceremony. "There," she said, closing the door. "Now we wait." The rest of Halloween passed in a blur of costumes, candy, and laughter. As the last of the neighborhood kids headed home and the jack-o'-lanterns flickered out one by one, the Johnsons settled in for the night, their freezer guardian standing silent watch. In the days that followed, life in Millbrook continued much as it always had. The leaves fell, the air grew colder, and people went about their daily routines. But there was a subtle change in the air, a sense of lightness that hadn't been there before. For the Johnsons, the changes were small but noticeable. Tom's presentation at work went off without a hitch, earning him a promotion he'd been eyeing for months. Emily aced a test she'd been worried about, while Max finally worked up the courage to join the school chess club. Sarah found herself sleeping better than she had in years, her usual anxieties seeming to melt away. Even Buddy seemed more energetic, his tail wagging with renewed vigor. Of course, there were those who would argue that these were all coincidences, that the freezer ritual had nothing to do with the family's good fortune. And perhaps they were right. But for the Johnsons, it didn't matter whether the magic was real or not. What mattered was the way it had brought them closer together, the way it had opened their eyes to the power of shared belief and intention. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah continued her research into folklore and protection rituals. She started a blog chronicling her findings, which quickly gained a following in the online paranormal community. Tom, much to his own surprise, found himself drawn into her studies, offering a skeptic's perspective that balanced out Sarah's more open-minded approach. The kids, too, were changed by the experience. Emily's interest in the supernatural blossomed into a passion for anthropology, while Max's quiet introspection led him to explore meditation and mindfulness. But it wasn't just the Johnsons who were affected. All across Millbrook, people reported similar experiences. The Hendersons' long-standing feud with their neighbors suddenly resolved itself. Old Mr. Grayson's arthritis, which had plagued him for years, seemed to ease up. The high school football team, perennial underdogs, made it to the state championships for the first time in decades. Of course, there were skeptics. The local newspaper ran an editorial decrying the mass delusion that had gripped the town. Some residents steadfastly refused to participate in what they saw as nothing more than superstitious nonsense. But for many in Millbrook, the freezer ritual became an annual tradition. Each Halloween, families would gather to create their protection bundles, filling their freezers with tokens of love, hope, and good fortune. As the years passed, the legend of Millbrook's freezer guardians grew. Paranormal enthusiasts from around the country would flock to the town each Halloween, hoping to witness some tangible evidence of the supernatural. Ghost hunting shows sent film crews, and more than one aspiring novelist used the town as inspiration for their latest bestseller. Through it all, the Johnsons remained at the center of the phenomenon. Sarah's blog evolved into a best-selling book series, exploring protection rituals from around the world. Tom, ever the pragmatist, started a foundation to channel some of the town's newfound tourism revenue into local charities and education initiatives. Emily went on to study cultural anthropology in college, her thesis on modern folklore practices, earning her national recognition. Max, still quiet and thoughtful, became known for his mindfulness workshops, teaching others the power of intention and focused thought. And what of the original freezer guardian, that first bundle of hopes and dreams the Johnsons had frozen on that fateful Halloween night? It remained in their freezer year after year, a constant reminder of the night everything changed. Some nights, when the house was quiet and the world was asleep, Sarah would open the freezer and look at that small cloth bag, now frosted over and worn with age. In those moments, she would remember the mix of excitement and skepticism they'd felt, the way they'd come together as a family to create something magical. And she would smile, knowing that whether the magic was real or not, it had changed their lives in ways they could never have imagined. As the story of Millbrook and its freezer guardians spread, it began to take on a life of its own. Urban legends sprung up, each more fantastical than the last. Some claimed that on particularly cold nights, you could see a faint blue glow emanating from the freezers of true believers. Others swore that in times of great danger, the frozen tokens would mysteriously appear to those in need, offering protection and guidance. Scholars and skeptics alike descended on the town, each hoping to unlock the secret of Millbrook's supposed magical properties. Physicists conducted experiments measuring temperature fluctuations and electromagnetic fields. Psychologists studied the effects of belief on perception and luck. Folklorists traced the origins of the ritual, trying to uncover some ancient precedent. But for all their efforts, no one could quite explain what had happened in Millbrook. The freezer ritual defied conventional explanation, existing in that murky area between science and faith, between the known and the unknowable. For Sarah, watching her little family tradition grow into a global phenomenon was both exhilarating and overwhelming. She found herself thrust into the role of reluctant expert, fielding questions from reporters, researchers, and curious individuals from around the world. "But how does it work?" they would ask, pens poised and cameras rolling. And Sarah would smile, that same mix of wonder and uncertainty in her eyes that she'd had on that first Halloween night. "I don't know that it does work, not in the way you're asking," she would reply. "But I do know that it brought my family closer together. I know that it made us more mindful of the good things in our lives, more appreciative of each other and the world around us. And isn't that a kind of magic in itself?" As the years rolled on and the children grew up and moved away, Sarah and Tom found themselves becoming the elders of Millbrook, the keepers of the town's unique history. They watched as new families moved in, skeptical at first of the town's peculiar Halloween tradition, only to find themselves drawn into the ritual year after year. Each date, as the leaves turned golden and the air grew crisp, Sarah would feel a familiar stirring of excitement. She would watch as families gathered in their kitchens, carefully selecting items for their freezer guardians. She would see the looks of concentration on children's faces as they focused their intentions, the soft smiles of parents as they embraced the magic of the moment. And on Halloween night, as the town fell silent and the last trick-or-treaters headed home, Sarah would stand in her kitchen, hand on the freezer door, and think back to that first night. She would remember Mrs. Henderson's whispered warning in the supermarket, the family debates over what to include, the nervous excitement as they placed that first bundle in the freezer. In those moments, Sarah would feel a deep sense of gratitude, not for any supernatural protection or mystical guardianship, but for the way this simple act had transformed her family and her town, for the connections it had forged, the curiosity it had sparked, and the sense of wonder it had instilled. As she closed the freezer door, Sarah would whisper a quiet thank you to the universe, to the power of belief, to the magic of human connection. And she would smile, knowing that whatever the future held, Millbrook would face it together, their frozen guardians standing watch through the long, dark night. The legend of Millbrook's freezer guardians continued to grow, spreading far beyond the town's borders. It became a cultural touchstone, referenced in movies and TV shows, debated on late-night talk shows, and studied in university classrooms. Some saw it as a harmless bit of modern folklore, a quaint tradition born out of small-town superstition. Others viewed it as a powerful metaphor for the human need to find meaning and control in an often chaotic world. And there were those who believed, truly and deeply, in the protective power of those frozen tokens. As for the truth, perhaps it lay somewhere in between, in that liminal space where belief and reality intertwine, where the power of the human mind can shape the world in ways we don't fully understand. In the end, the story of Millbrook and its freezer guardians became more than just a local legend. It evolved into a testament to the power of community, belief, and the enduring human spirit. As the years rolled on, Millbrook found itself at the center of an unexpected cultural phenomenon. The town's annual Halloween ritual began to attract visitors from all over the world. What had once been a quiet, close-knit community was now a bustling hub of activity, every date. Local businesses thrived, with gift shops selling miniature freezers and DIY protection bundle kits. The Johnson family, once just ordinary citizens, were now local celebrities. Sarah's books on protection rituals and modern folklore became international bestsellers, translated into dozens of languages. Tom, ever the practical one, saw an opportunity to channel this newfound attention into something positive. He spearheaded the creation of the Millbrook Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to promoting community welfare and education. The foundation used the proceeds from Halloween tourism to fund scholarships, community programs, and local infrastructure improvements. Emily, now a respected anthropologist, returned to Millbrook frequently to study the evolving tradition. She marveled at how a simple family ritual had grown into a cultural touchstone, shaping the identity of an entire town and beyond. "It's fascinating," she would say during her lectures at prestigious universities, "how a modern invention like the freezer could become the focal point of a protection ritual. It speaks to our innate human need to find magic in the mundane, to imbue everyday objects with extraordinary power." Max, always the quiet observer, found his calling in an unexpected place. He became a counselor, specializing in helping people find meaning and purpose in their lives. He often used the freezer ritual as a metaphor in his sessions, encouraging his clients to identify what they truly wanted to protect and nurture in their lives. As for Buddy, the Johnsons' faithful golden retriever, he had long since passed on. But his legacy lived on in the form of a bronze statue in the town square, depicting him with his favorite chew toy, the very one that had been part of that first protection bundle. Children would rub his nose for luck before trick-or-treating, adding yet another layer to Millbrook's rich tapestry of traditions. The ritual itself continued to evolve. What had started as a simple act of putting meaningful objects in the freezer had become an elaborate ceremony in many households. Families would spend weeks preparing, carefully selecting their items and imbuing them with intentions. Some created intricate ice sculptures to house their protection bundles. Others composed songs or wrote poems to accompany the freezing process. There were even those who turned the whole thing into a performance art piece, live streaming their rituals to audiences around the world. But for all its growth and change, the heart of the ritual remained the same. It was still about coming together, about focusing on what truly mattered, about finding a moment of magic in an often mundane world. As Millbrook's fame grew, it inevitably attracted its share of controversy. Religious leaders debated whether the ritual was a harmless tradition or a form of pagan worship. Scientists continued to search for a rational explanation for the town's supposed good fortune. Skeptics organized counter-events, freezing pictures of famous debunkers or copies of skeptical literature. The media attention was relentless. Documentary crews became a common sight on Millbrook's streets. Reality TV producers pitched show ideas about families competing to create the most effective freezer guardian. There was even talk of a Hollywood movie based on the town's story, with A-list actors vying for the roles of Sarah and Tom. Through it all, the Johnsons tried to stay grounded. They were grateful for the positive changes the ritual had brought to their lives and their community. But they never lost sight of what really mattered: family, connection, and the power of shared belief. As Sarah approached her 60th birthday, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. She thought about that day in the supermarket, about Mrs. Henderson's whispered warning that had started it all. She wondered what the old gossip would think if she could see Millbrook now. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun set over the town and the first Halloween decorations began to appear, Sarah took a walk through the neighborhood. She passed by houses where families were already beginning their preparations for the big night. Through windows, she could see parents and children huddled together, carefully selecting their freezer offerings. She smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the unseasonably mild weather. This was her legacy, she realized. Not the books, or the fame, or the foundation, but this sense of community, of shared purpose, of wonder. As she turned the corner onto her street, Sarah was struck by a sudden thought. What if Mrs. Henderson hadn't approached her that day? What if she had dismissed the old woman's words without a second thought? How different would their lives be now? It was a dizzying thing to contemplate, the way small moments could snowball into life-changing events. A chance encounter, a whispered secret, a decision to embrace the unknown. These were the things that could alter the course of not just a life, but an entire community. Sarah's musings were interrupted by the sound of laughter coming from her own home. She quickened her pace, eager to rejoin her family. As she approached the house, she could see Tom in the kitchen window, his face creased with laughter as he talked animatedly with someone out of view. Entering the house, Sarah was greeted by a scene of warm chaos. Emily was home for a visit, her academic papers spread across the dining room table as she argued good-naturedly with Max about the psychological implications of ritual behavior. Tom was in the kitchen, attempting to bake cookies in the shape of freezers, with limited success, judging by the smell of burning sugar in the air. And there, in the midst of it all, was a sight that made Sarah's heart swell. Her granddaughter, 5-year-old Lily, sat on the floor surrounded by an assortment of small objects: shiny pebbles, colourful ribbons, a slightly battered stuffed animal. Her little face was scrunched up in concentration as she carefully considered each item. "What are you doing, sweetie?" Sarah asked, kneeling down beside her. Lily looked up, her eyes shining with excitement. "I'm picking my freezer things, Grandma. Daddy says I'm old enough to choose my own this year." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. Here it was, the tradition passing down to a new generation. She watched as Lily solemnly held up a glittery hair clip. "This is to protect my dreams," the little girl explained seriously. "And this," she held up a smooth blue marble, "is to keep the monsters away." "Those are wonderful choices," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "Do you know why we put these things in the freezer?" Lily nodded emphatically. "To keep the bad things frozen so they can't get us." Sarah chuckled. It wasn't quite the explanation she would have given, but there was a certain childlike logic to it that she couldn't argue with. "That's right, sweetheart. And do you know what the most important part is?" Lily thought for a moment, her little brow furrowed in concentration. "Is it love?" she asked hesitantly. Sarah felt her heart might burst with pride and affection. "That's exactly right, Lily. The most important part is love. Love for our family, love for our friends, love for our community. That's what really keeps the bad things away." As she helped Lily gather her chosen items, Sarah found herself marveling once again at the strange and wonderful journey that had led them here. From a chance encounter in a supermarket to a global phenomenon, from a simple family tradition to a legacy that would outlive them all. The sun had fully set now, and through the window, Sarah could see the first stars beginning to twinkle in the darkening sky. Soon, the streets would be filled with trick-or-treaters, their laughter and excited chatter filling the night air. And in homes all across Millbrook, and indeed in homes around the world, families would be gathering around their freezers, ready to enact their own versions of the ritual that had begun in this very house. As she watched her family bustling around her, each lost in their own preparations for the big night, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. Whatever the future held, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And they would face them with hope, with love, and with a little bit of frozen magic on their side. The weeks leading up to Halloween were always a whirlwind in Millbrook, but this year seemed especially chaotic. The town was preparing to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the first freezer ritual, and it seemed like everyone had an idea about how to mark the occasion. The town council, led by an enthusiastic group of younger members who had grown up with the tradition, proposed a series of events to commemorate the anniversary. There would be a parade featuring giant papier-mâché freezers, a scholarly symposium on the anthropological significance of modern folklore, and even a freezer-themed fun run. Participants were encouraged to dress as their favorite frozen foods. Sarah found herself at the center of it all, besieged by requests for interviews, appearances, and endorsements. She tried to take it all in stride, but there were moments when she longed for the simplicity of those early days, when the ritual was just a family affair. Tom, sensing her overwhelm, took charge of managing the public aspects of their suddenly very public lives. He fielded calls from reporters, coordinated with the Millbrook Foundation, to ensure the anniversary celebrations benefited the community, and generally ran interference to give Sarah some much-needed space. As for Emily and Max, they had their own roles to play in the anniversary preparations. Emily was organising the scholarly symposium, bringing together experts in folklore, anthropology, and religious studies from around the world to discuss the Millbrook phenomenon. Max, meanwhile, was working with local schools to develop a curriculum that used the freezer ritual as a jumping-off point to discuss topics like community, tradition, and the power of positive thinking. But it was Lily who truly captured the spirit of the occasion. At 7 years old, she had appointed herself the official Junior Freezer Guardian of Millbrook. She took her duties very seriously, solemnly inspecting her friends' protection bundles and offering advice on the best items to include. "You need something shiny," she would insist, her voice carrying all the authority a 7-year-old could muster. "The evil can't stand shiny things. And something soft too, to catch your good dreams." Her parents and grandparents watched her with a mixture of amusement and pride. There was something magical about seeing the tradition through a child's eyes, untainted by skepticism or overthinking. As date drew nearer, the excitement in Millbrook reached a fever pitch. The town was decked out in an odd mix of traditional Halloween decorations and freezer-themed paraphernalia. Jack-o'-lanterns grinned from every porch, while banners proclaiming 25 years of frozen protection fluttered from lampposts. The national media had picked up on the anniversary story, and news vans from major networks clogged the streets. Reporters roamed the town, accosting locals for sound bites about their experiences with the ritual. Some of the older residents grumbled about the fuss, yearning for the days when Halloween was just about candy and costumes. But most of the town embraced the attention, proud of their unique place in modern folklore. The day before Halloween, Sarah woke early, unable to sleep with the weight of anticipation hanging over her. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Tom, and made her way downstairs. In the quiet of the pre-dawn kitchen, Sarah found herself drawn to the freezer. She opened it slowly, the familiar hum of the motor filling the silence. There, nestled between frozen peas and a carton of ice cream, was the original protection bundle. Sarah reached out and touched it gently, marveling at how something so small could have had such a profound impact on their lives. The cloth was worn now, frayed at the edges, but the items inside were still intact, preserved by the cold and by the power of memory. As she stood there, lost in thought, Sarah heard a small sound behind her. She turned to find Lily standing in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Grandma?" the little girl asked, her voice thick with sleep. "What are you doing?" Sarah smiled, holding out her hand. "Just checking on our guardian," she said. "Would you like to see?" Lily nodded eagerly, padding across the kitchen in her footed pajamas. Sarah lifted her up so she could peer into the freezer. "Is that the first one ever?" Lily asked in a whisper, her eyes wide with wonder. Sarah nodded. "It sure is. Your grandpa and I put it in here 25 years ago, before your mum and uncle were even born." Lily reached out a small hand, then hesitated, looking up at Sarah for permission. When Sarah nodded, the little girl gently touched the frozen bundle. "It's magic," Lily breathed, her face alight with awe. And in that moment, looking at her granddaughter's wonderstruck face, Sarah felt the truth of those words more powerfully than ever before. It was magic, not the kind found in fairy tales or fantasy novels, but the real magic of human connection, of shared belief, of love passed down through generations. As the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the kitchen window, Sarah hugged Lily close, feeling a profound sense of gratitude for this legacy they had created. Whatever the future held, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with hope in their hearts and a little bit of frozen magic on their side. The day of the 25th anniversary dawned bright and clear, as if even the weather was celebrating the occasion. The streets of Millbrook were alive with activity from the early hours, as final preparations were made for the day's events. Sarah and Tom found themselves swept up in the whirlwind of activity. There were speeches to give, ribbons to cut, and an endless stream of well-wishers to greet. But through it all, they made sure to carve out moments of quiet reflection, to remember the true spirit of the tradition they had unwittingly started all those years ago. The parade was a riot of colour and creativity. Floats shaped like giant freezers rolled down Main Street, accompanied by marching bands playing specially composed freezer fanfares. Children dressed as ice cubes and frost fairies scattered snowflakes, actually biodegradable confetti, over the cheering crowds. Emily's symposium was a more subdued affair, but no less impactful. Scholars from around the world presented papers on topics ranging from the freezer as modern altar, domestic appliances in contemporary spirituality, to viral rituals in the digital age, the online spread of the Millbrook phenomenon. Max's school program was a hit with the local kids. They spent the day learning about different protection rituals from around the world, creating their own symbolic objects, and discussing what they wanted to protect in their own lives. It was heartening to see how easily the children grasped the deeper meanings behind the ritual, often with an insight that put adults to shame. As evening fell and the official celebrations wound down, families began to retreat to their homes for the most important part of the day, the ritual itself. Despite all the public festivities, this part remained deeply personal, as intimate and meaningful as it had been on that first night 25 years ago. In the Johnson household, 4 generations gathered around the kitchen table. Sarah and Tom, their children and spouses, and a brood of grandchildren ranging from teenagers down to toddlers. Each had brought something to add to the family's protection bundle. Lily, taking her role as junior freezer guardian very seriously, solemnly inspected each item as it was presented. She nodded approvingly at her cousin's lucky baseball, smiled at the seashell her aunt had brought back from a recent vacation, and giggled at the rubber duck her youngest cousin insisted would scare away the bad dreams. When it came time for Sarah to add her contribution, she hesitated for a moment. Then, with a smile, she placed a small, worn notebook on the table. "What's that, Grandma?" Lily asked, peering at the faded cover. "This," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion, "is the notebook where I wrote down Mrs. Henderson's warning all those years ago, where this whole adventure began." A hush fell over the room as the family regarded the unassuming object. In many ways, that notebook was the true origin of their tradition, the seed from which their shared history had grown. "I think," Sarah continued, looking around at the faces of her loved ones, "that this year we should add it to our bundle to remind us of where we came from and how far we've come." There were nods of agreement and a few misty eyes as the notebook was carefully wrapped with the other items. Tom gave Sarah's hand a squeeze, a lifetime of shared experiences passing between them in that simple gesture. As they moved to the freezer, Sarah found herself hanging back, content to watch as the younger generations took charge of the ritual. She saw the same look of nervous excitement. As they moved to the freezer, Sarah found herself hanging back, content to watch as the younger generations took charge of the ritual. She saw the same look of nervous excitement on her children's faces that she and Tom had worn 25 years ago. She saw the wonder in her grandchildren's eyes, the same wonder that had first inspired them to embrace this odd little tradition. Lily, standing on tiptoes to reach the freezer handle, looked back at Sarah. "Grandma, will you do the honors? Please." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She stepped forward, placing her hand over Lily's on the freezer handle. "Together," she said softly. As they opened the freezer door, a collective hush fell over the room. The cold air spilled out, carrying with it the weight of 25 years of hopes, dreams, and protection. Sarah carefully placed the new bundle inside, right next to the original one from all those years ago. As the door closed with a soft thud, Sarah felt a sense of completion wash over her. This ritual, born from a chance encounter and a whispered warning, had become so much more than she could have ever imagined. It had shaped her family, her community, and touched lives around the world. Later that night, after the last of the trick-or-treaters had gone home and the house had quieted, Sarah found herself alone in the kitchen once more. She stood before the freezer, her hand resting lightly on its cool surface. "Well, Mrs. Henderson," she said softly to the empty room, "I hope we did right by your warning. I think we did." As if in response, she felt a gentle warmth spread through her, a feeling of peace and rightness that seemed to emanate from the freezer itself. Sarah smiled, patting the appliance affectionately before turning to head to bed. In the years that followed, the Millbrook freezer ritual continued to evolve and spread. It adapted to new technologies, smart freezers with special compartments for protection bundles, apps that help people choose their items and focus their intentions. It found new meanings in different cultures, merging with local traditions and beliefs. But at its heart, it remained what it had always been: a moment of connection, of reflection, of hope. A reminder that in a world that often seemed cold and uncaring, there was always a place where love and protection could be found. Sarah and Tom grew older, eventually passing the mantle of town elders to their children. Emily's scholarly work on the ritual became the definitive text on the subject, studied in universities around the world. Max's counseling practice flourished, helping countless people find meaning and purpose through mindful intention setting. And Lily? She grew into her role as the keeper of the family tradition. As an adult, she became a teacher, incorporating lessons about community and belief into her curriculum. Every Halloween, she would gather her own children around the freezer, telling them the story of their great-grandmother Sarah and the magical tradition she had started. The original protection bundle remained in the Johnson family freezer, passed down through the generations. It became a touchstone, a physical link to the past and a symbol of the enduring power of family and tradition. As for Millbrook itself, it remained a place of pilgrimage for those seeking to understand the ritual or simply to experience its unique atmosphere. The town embraced its identity as the birthplace of a modern legend, balancing reverence for the tradition with a healthy sense of humor about its unusual claim to fame. And on quiet nights, when the wind whispered through the trees and the stars twinkled overhead, some swore they could feel a special kind of magic in the air. A magic born not of supernatural forces, but of something far more powerful: the shared beliefs and hopes of a community, frozen in time and preserved for generations to come. In the end, the story of Millbrook's Freezer Guardians was more than just a tale of superstition or coincidence. It was a testament to the power of human connection, to the strength found in shared traditions, and to the magic that can be created when people come together with open hearts and minds. As for what exactly you should put in your freezer on date to ward off evil, well, that's a secret each person must discover for themselves. But perhaps the real magic lies not in what you freeze, but in the act of believing, of hoping, of connecting with something larger than yourself. So this Halloween, as the veil between worlds grows thin and the night air carries a hint of mystery, take a moment to consider what you hold dear. What do you wish to protect? What hopes do you harbor for the future? And then, with intention and an open heart, place a small token of those dreams in your freezer. Who knows, you might just be starting a tradition of your own. In Millbrook, as another Halloween night falls and porch lights flicker on to welcome trick-or-treaters, countless freezers hum quietly in kitchens across town. And in each one, nestled between the frozen peas and the ice cream, lie small bundles of hope and protection. A tradition frozen in time, yet ever evolving, ever meaningful. And in a small, well-kept house on Maple Street, a little girl named after her great-grandmother Sarah places her very first protection bundle in the family freezer. As the door closes with a soft whoosh, she feels a shiver of excitement run down her spine. She doesn't know it yet, but she's just taken her first step in a journey that will span generations, a journey of love, belief, and just a touch of everyday magic. The story of Millbrook and its Freezer Guardians may have reached its 25th anniversary, but in many ways, it's only just beginning. For as long as there are people willing to believe, to hope, and to find wonder in the ordinary, the magic of that first frozen night will live on, in Millbrook, and perhaps in freezers around the world.